The hardest person to find is not someone who loves you when you have nothing, but someone who still sees you when the whole world only sees your success. On a brilliant autumn morning in downtown Chicago, the grand entrance of St. Matthew's Cathedral shimmered beneath clear blue skies as luxury cars lined the street and television cameras crowded every corner of the historic church. Fresh white roses framed the massive wooden doors. A string quartet played softly inside, and nearly 500 guests waited with eager smiles, believing they were about to witness the wedding of the year. Charlotte Hayes stood quietly in an elegant ivory gown that reflected the morning sunlight like polished marble. To millions of Americans, she was the billionaire chief executive officer who had transformed Hayes Global into one of the country's most admired companies before turning 40. She appeared on magazine covers, spoke before world leaders, and inspired thousands of young entrepreneurs. Yet none of those achievements could quiet the silence growing inside her heart. Just minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin, her fiancé requested one final private conversation. His voice trembled as he struggled to meet her eyes. "Charlotte," he whispered, "I thought I could do this. I really did." She remained calm. "Then what changed?" He lowered his head. "Every room we walk into belongs to you. Every headline is about you. Every success is yours. I do not want to spend my life being remembered as the man who married Charlotte Hayes." Charlotte listened without interrupting. There was no anger in her expression, no bitterness, only the quiet exhaustion of hearing another version of the same goodbye she had already lived through too many times. After several long seconds, she nodded gently. "Thank you for telling me before we made promises we could not keep." He looked at her with visible relief before quietly walking away through a side entrance, leaving behind a cathedral filled with unanswered questions. Within minutes, the whispers began spreading across the sanctuary. Guests exchanged uneasy glances. Reporters rushed to update breaking news banners. Social media exploded with speculation before Charlotte had even removed her wedding veil. Yet instead of collapsing beneath public embarrassment, she turned toward her wedding planner with remarkable composure. "Please make sure every meal prepared for today's reception is delivered to local family shelters before sunset," she said softly. "Nothing should go to waste." The planner blinked in surprise. "Are you certain?" Charlotte smiled faintly. "Someone should still have a reason to celebrate today." Church volunteers watched silently as florists carefully carried thousands of fresh flowers outside, while delivery trucks prepared hundreds of untouched meals for families in need across Chicago. No speeches were given. No accusations were made. Charlotte thanked every musician, every server, every member of the church staff as if the day had unfolded exactly as planned. Even the elderly pastor quietly admitted he had rarely witnessed such grace in the middle of heartbreak. As Charlotte stepped into the waiting limousine, camera flashes filled the morning air while reporters shouted endless questions that she never answered. The vehicle slowly disappeared into city traffic, carrying away the woman everyone admired but almost nobody truly knew. Across the country, millions believed they had just watched another billionaire lose faith in love forever. None of them could have imagined that less than 200 miles away, in a quiet Illinois town where success was measured by honest work instead of headlines, a widowed single father named Ethan Walker was carefully repairing the old wooden roof of an elementary school before the afternoon rain arrived, completely unaware that destiny had already begun quietly driving toward him. Ethan Walker had never measured wealth by the balance of a bank account. To him, a successful day meant hearing his 8-year-old daughter laugh before school, finishing an honest day's work with sore hands, and knowing he had helped someone without expecting anything in return. Maple Creek was the kind of small Illinois town where front porches were still used every evening. Neighbors waved without checking who was driving past, and the bakery owner knew every child's favorite pastry by heart. Ethan belonged there in the quietest possible way. Every morning began before sunrise. He packed Lily's lunch, tied her light blonde hair into a neat ponytail with patient determination that had improved over the years, and drove her to Maple Creek Elementary in a well-maintained pickup truck that had traveled more than 200,000 miles. After dropping her off, he unlocked the doors to Walker Restoration, a modest woodworking shop filled with antique furniture waiting for a second chance. Old rocking chairs, oak dining tables, handmade cabinets, and grandfather clocks lined the walls beneath warm morning light pouring through tall windows. The air carried the comforting scent of cedar, fresh coffee, and polished wood. Ethan believed that restoring forgotten furniture was not much different from restoring people. Both required patience, kindness, and a willingness to see value where others only saw damage. That morning, Principal Margaret Collins stopped by the workshop, carrying a clipboard and a grateful smile. "The school roof survived last night's storm because of your repairs," she said. "The district wants to know how much they owe you." Ethan looked up from carefully sanding an antique dining chair and smiled politely. "Tell them to spend the money on new library books instead. Those children will get more use out of them than I ever could." Principal Collins shook her head with admiration. "You make it very difficult for people to repay you." Ethan laughed softly. "They already have. They trust me." Just then the front door opened, and Lily rushed inside after school, carrying a colorful drawing almost as large as herself. "Daddy, guess what?" she exclaimed. Ethan immediately set his tools aside and knelt beside her. "What amazing thing happened today?" Lily proudly unfolded the picture. It showed their little farmhouse beneath bright autumn trees, with the words "Home is where people wait for you" written carefully across the top. "Mrs. Dawson said we had to draw our favorite place," Lily explained. "Everyone else drew Disneyland or the beach, but I drew home." Ethan smiled with quiet emotion. "I think you chose the best place in the world." Lily looked around the workshop before asking, "Can we deliver Mrs. Harper's rocking chair after dinner?" "Of course," Ethan replied. "She's been waiting a long time to see it finished." As father and daughter loaded the beautifully restored chair into the back of the pickup truck, evening sunlight painted the quiet streets with shades of gold. They drove slowly through town, greeting neighbors by name until they reached the elderly widow's white farmhouse. Mrs. Harper's eyes filled with tears the moment she saw the restored chair. She gently ran her hand across the polished wood before whispering, "My husband built this for me 50 years ago. I thought I had lost the last piece of him." Ethan simply smiled. Some things deserve another chance. Neither Ethan nor Lily realized it, but at almost that same moment, nearly 200 miles away in Chicago, Charlotte Hayes stood alone beside the floor-to-ceiling windows of her penthouse apartment, staring at a city that admired everything she had built while quietly wondering whether there was still a place somewhere in America where someone might one day love her simply because she was Charlotte. 3 days passed, yet the silence inside Charlotte's penthouse grew heavier with each sunrise. Every morning began the same way. Her assistant arrived with a neatly organized schedule filled with board meetings, investor calls, charity events, and interviews that had been planned months in advance. Every evening ended with another quiet dinner prepared by a private chef, served at a dining table large enough for 12 people, but occupied by only one. Success surrounded her from every direction, yet companionship remained painfully absent. On Friday afternoon, after another exhausting strategy meeting, Charlotte stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Chicago as rain clouds drifted across the skyline. Her executive assistant entered carefully. "The board has approved next quarter's expansion plan. Congratulations." Charlotte nodded politely without turning around. "Thank you." The assistant hesitated before speaking again. "Would you like me to schedule the interview with Business Weekly?" Charlotte remained silent for several seconds before answering. "Cancel everything this weekend." The assistant blinked with surprise. "Everything?" Charlotte finally turned and offered a gentle smile. "For 2 days, I would like to remember what life feels like when nobody expects anything from me." Less than an hour later, she was driving alone along quiet Illinois highways in a silver sport utility vehicle instead of riding inside a chauffeured limousine. She wore a simple cream sweater, blue jeans, comfortable boots, and a baseball cap that hid her recognizable face. With every mile that carried her farther from the city, the noise inside her thoughts slowly became quieter. By late afternoon, she noticed a weathered wooden sign welcoming travelers to Maple Creek. The little town seemed almost untouched by the endless rush she had left behind. Children laughed outside an ice cream shop. Neighbors greeted one another from front porches. American flags fluttered gently outside small family businesses. Nobody appeared to be rushing anywhere. Charlotte parked beside a local bakery and stepped inside. With a warm smell of cinnamon, fresh bread, and brewed coffee immediately replaced the polished scent of expensive office buildings. An elderly woman behind the counter smiled kindly. "First time visiting?" Charlotte returned the smile. "Is it that obvious?" "Only because everyone who comes here for the first time stops breathing for a second when they smell the cinnamon rolls." Charlotte laughed softly before ordering one and a cup of coffee. As she stepped back onto Main Street, she noticed a colorful flyer taped inside the bakery window announcing the Maple Creek Harvest Festival the following morning. For reasons she could not explain, she decided to stay another day. She checked into the town's small bed and breakfast before taking a slow evening drive through the countryside as the sun dipped below fields painted gold by autumn light. A few miles outside town, the engine suddenly hesitated. A warning light illuminated the dashboard, followed by an unexpected loss of power. Charlotte guided the vehicle safely onto the shoulder. Beneath a row of towering maple trees whose brilliant red and golden leaves danced gently in the cool breeze. She stepped out, opened the hood, and stared at the engine with quiet uncertainty. "I suppose life enjoys surprising me," she whispered with a tired smile. Nearly 20 minutes passed with only the sound of rustling leaves and distant birds. Then, from around the bend in the peaceful country road, an aging blue pickup truck appeared, slowing naturally before pulling onto the shoulder behind her. A tall man climbed out carrying a worn metal toolbox, his flannel shirt dusted with fine sawdust from a day's honest work. Neither Charlotte nor Ethan realized it in that simple moment, but two completely different worlds had quietly arrived at the exact same place, and neither of their lives would ever follow the same road again. The tall man set his worn metal toolbox on the pavement before offering Charlotte a warm, unhurried smile that carried none of the curiosity she had grown accustomed to seeing in strangers. "Looks like your day could use a little kindness," he said. Charlotte smiled politely. "I was hoping it only needed a mechanic." Ethan chuckled softly. "Sometimes those are the same thing." Without another question, he leaned over the open engine compartment, studying the vehicle with patient attention while the late afternoon breeze carried bright maple leaves across the quiet road. Charlotte watched him work with surprising calm. He never glanced at her expensive vehicle with envy. He never tried to guess who she was. He simply focused on solving the problem in front of him. After several careful minutes, Ethan tightened a loose battery connection and inspected a worn cable before closing the hood with quiet confidence. "Try it now," he said. Charlotte climbed into the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine came to life immediately with a smooth, reassuring sound. She stepped back outside wearing an expression of genuine relief. "You have no idea how grateful I am." Ethan shrugged with an easy smile. It was a loose connection. The best problems are usually the simple ones. Charlotte reached in her purse and removed several crisp bills. "Please let me pay you." Ethan looked at the money for only a brief second before gently shaking his head. "No, thank you." She frowned slightly. "You repair my vehicle." "It only took a few minutes," he answered. "If you really want to spend money, buy dinner at one of Maple Creek's local restaurants." They could use the business more than I could. Before Charlotte could respond, another voice floated through the quiet air. "Daddy, is she okay?" Lily climbed carefully out of the old pickup truck carrying a small paper bag that smelled of warm cinnamon rolls. She hurried toward them with bright blue eyes full of concern before stopping politely in front of Charlotte. "Hello," she said with a cheerful smile. "I am Lily." Charlotte knelt, so they were eye level. "Hello, Lily. I am Charlotte." Lily studied her face with the complete honesty only children seemed able to possess. Ethan smiled apologetically. "She thinks before she speaks. Sometimes that makes grown-ups nervous." Lily ignored him for another thoughtful moment before asking quietly, "Can I ask you something?" Charlotte nodded. "Of course." The little girl tilted her head slightly. Why do your eyes look sad even when you are smiling? The question settled gently into the autumn air. Ethan immediately looked embarrassed. Lily, sweetheart, we do not ask strangers things like that. But Charlotte slowly raised one hand. It is all right. She looked toward the endless fields stretching beyond the maple trees before returning her gaze to the little girl. For years, journalists had asked about profits, investors had asked about strategy, and admirers had asked about success. No one had ever asked whether she was happy. A quiet smile touched her lips, this time without pretending. Maybe because I forgot what it feels like to belong somewhere, she answered honestly. Lily thought carefully before opening the paper bag she still carried. She removed the last cinnamon roll and held it toward Charlotte with both hands. Daddy says people smile more after sharing food together. Charlotte accepted it gently, unable to stop a small laugh from escaping. Ethan watched the moment in peaceful silence, feeling as though something invisible had shifted beneath the golden afternoon light. None of the three understood it yet. But beside that ordinary country road, a lonely woman searching for peace and a quiet father who had never searched for anything extraordinary had just taken the first small step toward changing each other's lives forever. Charlotte expected Ethan to accept the money eventually, thank her politely, and disappear back into his own life. Instead, he closed the toolbox with an easy smile and stepped away from the vehicle as though the repair had been nothing more than an ordinary favor between neighbors. Well, he said, brushing a little sawdust from his sleeves, your weekend has been rescued. Charlotte looked at the folded bills still resting in her hand. You really are not going to let me pay you, are you? Ethan shook his head. If helping someone always comes with a price tag, it stops feeling like kindness. The words lingered in Charlotte's thoughts far longer than she expected. Before she could answer, Lily tugged gently on her father's sleeve. Daddy, can Miss Charlotte come to the Harvest Festival tomorrow? Ethan smiled awkwardly. Only if she already has plans. Lily looked directly at Charlotte with hopeful eyes. There will be homemade pies, live music, pumpkin carving, and Mrs. Harper always wins the apple pie contest, even though everyone says they have a secret recipe too. Charlotte laughed, genuinely this time. That sounds much more exciting than my original plans. Ethan tilted his head with quiet curiosity. And what were those? Charlotte looked toward the colorful fields stretching beyond the road. Honestly, I did not have any. Ethan nodded as though he completely understood without asking another question. Then you are officially invited. The following morning, Maple Creek was filled with cheerful voices and the comforting sounds of a small American town celebrating autumn together. Children raced through hay bale mazes while local musicians played country songs beneath strings of warm lights hanging across Main Street. Handmade quilts, fresh vegetables, carved wooden decorations, and homemade pies filled rows of family-owned booths. Charlotte arrived wearing a simple cream sweater, blue jeans, and comfortable boots, blending naturally into the crowd. No one recognized her. To everyone there, she was simply a visitor enjoying the festival. Ethan greeted her with the same relaxed smile he had worn beside the roadside. Good morning. Good morning, she replied. Lily immediately reached for Charlotte's hand. Come see my favorite place. She led Charlotte toward the community craft tent, where children painted birdhouses while volunteers taught woodworking and quilting. Ethan spent the next hour helping several elderly neighbors repair broken chairs they had carried to the festival. Charlotte quietly watched as one grateful widow attempted to hand him money. Ethan politely refused. Just promise me you will sit in it every evening, he said. The elderly woman smiled through grateful eyes. You remind me of my husband. Charlotte noticed something she had almost forgotten existed. No one admired Ethan because of what he owned. They respected him because of who he consistently chose to be. Later that afternoon, the three of them shared hot cider while sitting beneath an old maple tree overlooking the festival. Lily rested comfortably against Charlotte's shoulder without hesitation. The little girl looked up with innocent curiosity. Miss Charlotte. Yes. Charlotte answered softly. When you go home tomorrow, will you forget about us? Charlotte's smile faded into thoughtful silence. She looked at Ethan, who quietly watched children laughing nearby, without trying to influence her answer. After several moments, she gently squeezed Lily's hand. "I do not think forgetting you would be possible." Lily beamed with happiness. Ethan smiled quietly, but something deep inside him warned that moments this peaceful rarely lasted forever. Far beyond the festival grounds, a black luxury sedan slowly entered Maple Creek while two sharply dressed corporate security officers scanned the streets. They had finally discovered where Charlotte Hayes had disappeared, and the peaceful little town was about to become the center of a story that none of its residents had ever expected. The joyful sounds of the Harvest Festival continued drifting across Maple Creek until a sleek black luxury sedan rolled quietly to a stop beside the town square. The cheerful conversations softened as two professionally dressed security officers stepped out, followed by Charlotte's executive assistant, carrying a leather portfolio pressed tightly against her side. Their polished appearance looked strangely out of place among handcrafted quilts, wooden toys, fresh apple cider, and children laughing beneath colorful autumn banners. Charlotte noticed them immediately. The smile that had rested naturally on her face slowly faded, replaced by the familiar weight she had hoped to escape for just one weekend. Her assistant approached respectfully. "Miss Hayes," she said in a calm voice, "we have been searching everywhere. The board meeting begins tomorrow morning, and every major financial network is asking where you are." Several nearby festival visitors quietly exchanged confused glances. Ethan looked toward Charlotte, but asked nothing. He simply waited. The assistant continued carefully. "There is something else." She handed Charlotte a tablet displaying dozens of headlines. "Billionaire Chief Executive Officer missing after canceled wedding. Mystery man seen with Charlotte Hayes. Hidden romance in small Illinois town." Charlotte closed the screen almost immediately. "I understand." One of the security officers lowered his voice. "Reporters have already located Maple Creek. They will likely arrive within the hour." Ethan glanced across the peaceful festival where children chased one another through falling maple leaves. "That would change this place," he said quietly. Charlotte nodded with visible sadness. "Yes." Lily looked from one adult to another, sensing the conversation had suddenly become much heavier than she could understand. "Miss Charlotte, are you leaving?" Charlotte slowly knelt until they were eye level. "I may have to." Lily frowned. "Because those people found you?" Charlotte gently brushed a loose strand of blonde hair behind the little girl's ear. "Sometimes responsibilities find us even when we're trying to hide." Ethan remained silent for several moments, before finally speaking. "Your company depends on you." Charlotte looked toward him. "I know. Thousands of families probably depend on you too." She lowered her eyes. "I know that as well." Ethan smiled with the same quiet kindness that had first greeted her beside the roadside. "Then you already know what you have to do." Charlotte searched his face, almost hoping he would ask her to stay. He never did. Instead, he chose her peace over his own wishes. That simple act somehow touched her more deeply than any declaration of love ever could. Mrs. Harper slowly approached, carrying a warm apple pie wrapped carefully in a checkered towel. "For your trip home," she said gently. "Every traveler deserves something that reminds them kindness still exists." Charlotte accepted the pie with grateful hands. "Thank you." One by one, neighbors who had only known her as Charlotte offered quiet goodbyes without asking for photographs, signatures, or explanations. No one mentioned billion-dollar companies. No one treated her differently after learning who she really was. They simply wished her a safe journey home. As the sun began slipping behind the golden fields, Charlotte walked toward her silver sport utility vehicle. Before opening the driver's door, she turned back one last time. Ethan stood beside Lily beneath the old maple tree where they had shared hot cider only an hour earlier. He raised one hand in a simple farewell. Lily waved with both arms, smiling as brightly as ever. Charlotte smiled back through eyes beginning to glisten. She quietly realized that for the first time in many years, she was not driving away from a place. She was driving away from the first place that had truly felt like home. Chicago welcomed Charlotte back with gleaming glass towers, endless streams of traffic, and a calendar that left no room for silence. By sunrise on Monday, she was once again seated at the head of the long walnut conference table inside Hayes Global, surrounded by executives discussing quarterly projections, international partnerships, and shareholder expectations. Every presentation was polished. Every chart pointed upward. Every person around the table congratulated her on another successful quarter. Yet while the room celebrated numbers, Charlotte found herself thinking about a little woodworking shop that smelled of cedar, a homemade apple pie resting on the passenger seat during her drive home, and a little girl who had asked whether she would forget them. She quietly realized she had not forgotten them for even a single minute. Meanwhile, life in Maple Creek returned to its familiar rhythm. Ethan unlocked Walker Restoration before sunrise, swept the workshop floor, brewed fresh coffee, and continued restoring forgotten furniture one careful piece at a time. Nothing about his routine changed, at least on the outside. Yet every afternoon, when the sound of an approaching vehicle echoed along the road, he found himself glancing instinctively toward the workshop window before smiling faintly at his own foolish hope. Lily noticed long before he admitted it. One evening while they prepared dinner together, she looked up from stirring soup on the stove. "Daddy." "Yes, sweetheart." "You miss Miss Charlotte." Ethan smiled gently, without looking away from the vegetables he was chopping. "She has an important life back in Chicago." Lily nodded thoughtfully. "That is not what I asked." Ethan paused for a long moment before answering honestly. "Yes, Ido." Lily smiled with quiet satisfaction. "I knew it." Back in Chicago, Charlotte attended another charity gala surrounded by influential business leaders, politicians, and investors. Elegant music filled the ballroom, while crystal chandeliers reflected warm light across polished marble floors. Guests complimented her resilience after the canceled wedding, praised her latest business achievements, and discussed future investments worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Charlotte thanked them politely, but every conversation felt strangely distant. During dinner, she absent-mindedly reached into her handbag and discovered the small carved wooden maple leaf Lily had pressed in her hand before she left Maple Creek. She gently traced its smooth edges beneath the table while the voices around her slowly faded into the background. It was astonishing how something carved by ordinary hands could suddenly feel more valuable than every diamond sparkling beneath the ballroom lights. Later that evening, she returned to her penthouse, opened the windows overlooking the city, and placed Mrs. Harper's handwritten pie recipe beside the handcrafted music box on her kitchen counter. She stood there quietly until her executive assistant called. "Tomorrow morning's interviews have been confirmed," the assistant said. "The financial networks would also like to address recent rumors about the unidentified man photographed with you in Maple Creek." Charlotte remained silent for several seconds before answering. "Please decline every personal question. Would you like us to issue a statement denying the rumors?" Charlotte looked toward the tiny wooden maple leaf resting beside the music box. A gentle smile slowly appeared. "No," she replied softly. "There is nothing to deny." Hundreds of miles away, Ethan stepped on a front porch after putting Lily to bed. The cool autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves across the quiet countryside. He looked toward the stars above Maple Creek and whispered almost to himself, "I hope you found your way home." At that exact moment, Charlotte stood beneath the same night sky outside her penthouse balcony, holding the little wooden maple leaf close to her heart while quietly wondering whether home had been the place she had just left behind. 1 week later, Hayes Global's annual leadership summit filled the largest auditorium in the company's headquarters with executives, investors, employees, journalists, and television crews from across the country. Charlotte stood backstage wearing an elegant navy suit, reviewing the speech she had rewritten 3 different times. Every version discussed profits, expansion, and innovation, yet none of those words felt honest anymore. She quietly folded the pages, placed them on a nearby table, and walked toward the stage with nothing except her own thoughts. The applause echoed warmly as she stepped behind the podium, overlooking hundreds of familiar faces. "Good morning," she began with a calm smile. "For years, I believed leadership meant always having the right answers. Recently, learned that sometimes the most important lessons arrive from people who never expected to teach them. The audience listened attentively while cameras captured every word. Charlotte continued speaking about gratitude, community, and the quiet dignity of ordinary people whose kindness often changed lives without recognition. Several board members exchanged puzzled glances. This was not the speech they had approved. Suddenly, the large auditorium doors opened near the back of the room. Every head turned. Ethan Walker stepped inside wearing the only dark suit he owned, neatly pressed but modest beside the tailored designer clothing surrounding him. Beside him walked Lily in a simple light blue dress, carefully holding a small handcrafted wooden box with both hands. Charlotte's heart skipped a beat. She had never told Ethan about the summit. She had never invited him. Yet somehow there he was. Earlier that morning, after receiving an unexpected handwritten letter delivered to Walker Restoration by overnight courier, Ethan had discovered that Charlotte's executive assistant had quietly enclosed 3 guest passes together with a single note. It simply read, "If there is something your heart still needs to say, today is the day." Security welcomed them without hesitation because Charlotte herself had arranged the passes several days earlier without fully understanding why. Ethan slowly walked toward the stage while the room fell completely silent. Lily smiled encouragingly and placed the wooden box into his hands. Ethan stopped only a few feet from Charlotte before speaking with the same quiet sincerity that had first greeted her beside the country road. "I spent my whole life restoring things that other people believed were beyond saving," he said softly. "Old furniture, family heirlooms, pieces of history that simply needed someone willing to care." He carefully opened the wooden box. Inside rested a beautifully handcrafted silver engagement ring he had forged himself, resting beside the polished gold wedding band that had once belonged to his late mother. Warm light reflected gently across the simple ring, revealing countless hours of careful craftsmanship rather than extraordinary expense. Ethan looked directly into Charlotte's eyes. "I cannot promise a life without difficult days. I cannot promise perfect answers. I cannot promise you a world without headlines or responsibilities." His voice remained steady despite hundreds of people watching. "But I can promise there will always be someone waiting to ask how your heart is before asking how your company is doing. I can promise a dinner table where your first name matters more than your last name. I can promise that Lily and I will never love you because of what you built. We will love you because of who you are when nobody is watching." Tears quietly filled Charlotte's eyes. Ethan smiled gently before taking one final step closer. "Charlotte Hayes, will you let me spend the rest of my life reminding you that the greatest success any person can achieve is simply coming home to people who are grateful you walked through the front door?" The enormous auditorium became so completely silent that the faint hum of the lights overhead seemed almost impossibly loud. Every camera stopped moving. Every whisper disappeared. In that extraordinary moment, the richest woman in the room was no longer thinking about billion-dollar companies or worldwide headlines. She was simply looking at the one man who had never once treated her like anything other than Charlotte. Charlotte looked into Ethan's steady eyes as the handcrafted silver ring rested quietly between them, reflecting the soft light of the auditorium. Tears slipped gently down her cheeks. Yet for the first time in many years, they carried no loneliness. They carried relief. A gentle smile slowly appeared across her face as she nodded once. "Yes," she whispered. The single word was almost too quiet for the audience to hear, but it seemed to echo through every corner of the auditorium. Ethan carefully slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that had restored countless broken treasures throughout his life. This time, however, he was not restoring furniture. He was helping restore a heart that had almost forgotten how to trust. For several long seconds, no one moved. Then, one by one, people throughout the auditorium slowly rose to their feet. The applause began quietly before growing into a heartfelt standing ovation. Even executives who had questioned Ethan's place in Charlotte's life found themselves smiling with genuine respect. No one was applauding a billionaire becoming engaged. They were honoring 2 people who had chosen humility over status, character over appearances, and love over fear. Lily hurried across the stage and wrapped both of them in the happiest embrace her small arms could manage. Charlotte knelt beside her and smiled through joyful tears. "Thank you," she whispered softly. Lily tilted her head. "For what?" Charlotte gently held both of the little girl's hands. "For reminding me that home is not a place you buy. It is the people who are waiting when you arrive." Lily smiled brightly before asking the question she had quietly carried inside her heart for days. "Does this mean I can call you Mom someday?" Charlotte embraced her tightly. "You can call me Mom today if it feels right to your heart." The little girl smiled so brightly that even seasoned journalists quietly lowered their cameras, choosing to witness the moment with their own eyes instead of through a lens. 1 year later, Hayes Global continued to grow under Charlotte's thoughtful leadership, but something important had changed. Every Friday afternoon, she left the city before sunset and drove to Maple Creek without fail. She still led board meetings, signed international agreements, and guided one of America's most respected companies, yet she never allowed success to replace the people who had taught her what truly mattered. Ethan continued operating Walker Restoration exactly as before. He politely declined offers to become an executive, spokesperson, or consultant for Hayes Global. Whenever reporters asked why, he simply smiled and answered, "My work was never about building a larger business. It has always been about helping old things tell their stories again." Together, they quietly established a charitable foundation supporting single parents, restoring community workshops, and providing educational grants for children in small towns across America. They insisted every project focus on dignity rather than publicity because they believed kindness accomplished its greatest work when no applause was expected. On a peaceful autumn evening, exactly 1 year after their first meeting beside the country road, the three of them returned beneath the same towering maple trees where Charlotte's vehicle had broken down. Ethan smiled as colorful leaves drifted gently across the road. "Funny how a loose battery cable changed everything," he said. Charlotte slipped her hand into his and looked toward Lily happily gathering bright red maple leaves nearby. "It was never the battery," she answered softly. "It was the moment someone finally looked at me and saw Charlotte before they ever saw Hayes." The golden sunset wrapped the quiet countryside in warm light as the three of them walked home together, proving that sometimes the greatest miracles do not arrive with wealth, fame, or extraordinary power. Sometimes they arrive in the form of an honest man, a hopeful little girl, and a simple invitation to finally belong.